Hey guys, if you can start to gather your seats, there's plenty of room down the front from the look of it. So welcome everybody to the Attribution Revolution mobile series. My name's Tim Taylor, I run West Coast sales for Magnetic. It's nice to see this event so well attended. We did this event down in LA, which is the market that I work in, and it was less well attended, so I feel mildly embarrassed about that. But I'm here to introduce you to tonight's moderator, James Green, a chap I've known for about 5 years. I worked with James at our previous company. And a fun fact about James, out of the blue about 5 years ago, James told me that he was abandoning the industry completely. He was going to sell his Manhattan apartment, buy a boat, and take his family around the world for about 1.5 years. So my question to you tonight, James, is when are you going to go and piss off and abandon me again? So welcome, James.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. So next week. Thank you all for coming. I already like this crowd better than any other crowd because usually we get everyone to sit down, and apparently a bunch of you said, I'm not sitting down, I'm just hanging out by the bar. So nice job, all of you back there in the bar. Keep it up. We've got a great panel for you tonight. We're going to start with a short video intro, and then we'll bring the panel up. So thank you very much. Let's roll the video.
Mobile is on track to become the largest player in the digital ecosystem, and it's predicted to represent 70% of all media spending by 2018. A multi-device world gives consumers more touchpoints than ever before and offers marketers increasing opportunities to reach audiences as they research, browse, and purchase online. But the path to purchase is no longer linear, and instead mirrors a flight map as consumers move between devices and screens.
Ten years ago, there was no problem because most users were only using a single digitally connected device. Now we have tablets and smartphones and wearables and TVs all on top of the computers that we use every day. And for a marketer, that makes understanding the user's behavior very difficult.
So mobile provides this sort of dimensional view of a consumer and the ability to connect with them on multiple times throughout their day. Whether it be television, whether it be display, whether it be visitation to a physical store, mobile provides this unifying mechanism for attribution. For marketers, that's an incredibly powerful new platform.
The biggest challenge that marketers face when it comes to this multi-screen journey is understanding and anticipating where the user is in their day and showing them the right message at the right time. In a study we recently did, 71% of consumers said they had a negative reaction if they got an inconsistent message across devices. And so marketers really need to focus on finding that user, understanding them across all of their devices, and making that message consistent.
You have to take into account the different devices people are using, or you'll have an incomplete picture. Users are seeing a stream of media. And to really understand performance, you have to determine how to fractionally allocate credit accurately across that stream of media.
So think about the ability to run a mobile campaign, target 8 million devices, each one in a contextually relevant, really meaningful way, and then be able to measure the effectiveness of that campaign, of that messaging, to drive those consumers to a particular store. If you understand mobile, you can now understand the consumer and their interactions across these different touch points.
If you're a marketer that's buying a lot of mobile activity, more than likely that conversion's not happening on the mobile device. So you're driving great influence in the purchase process, but the conversion's happening somewhere else. If you're using a last touch, last click model, and you're not taking into account cross-device influences, you're never going to be able to do mobile marketing well. If you're really looking at mobile as a channel that you want to use, you need to have a measurement platform that works with your media efforts to ensure that you understand the real credit that mobile's getting.
All right, thank you very much. Panelists, come on up. So this is the third in the series of attribution revolutions we've done. We always try to pick a topic that everyone loves. We started with attribution, obviously, and then we went to suspicious activity, and now we're in mobile. We always do the same format, which is we like to try to bring two larger companies, and when I say larger, I mean like Google and Facebook larger, And then 2 startups. And when I mean startups, I mean like PlaceIQ and Tapad. And we have the agency perspective, which I think is always great. So we have Steve there. So from PlaceIQ, we have Duncan, who's the CEO. So he should know what's going on.
Apparently.
From Facebook, we have Lauren, who is what is it? Global client. What is it? Client partner global marketing solutions. Yes. Been with Facebook 3 years. My favorite. I don't remember where I saw this, but somewhere. And I just want you to know that I want to enter this competition, and I know other panelists do too. Somewhere I found out that you were voted the fittest person in tech.
Okay, I have to correct you.
So like
You read it wrong.
Okay, come on.
TechCrunch did a story probably in 2012. It was one of the 35 fittest people in
One of the
tech.
35.
Reputable
I want
For what
to
it's worth.
enter it. I just want to go out there. We all,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So then we have Nick, who used to run product, but is now global strategy for Tapad.
That's right.
Yeah, which, for those of you that don't know, what global strategy means is that tonight he gets to fly to New York on a red eye, and tomorrow he gets to fly to Europe on a red eye. So that's what global strategy means, in case any of you are aspiring to that role. Then we have Paul, who has done more panels with us than anyone else. Thank you, Paul. Paul is one hell of a lucky guy. He was a CEO of Adometry, and then Adometry was bought by Google. So I'm guessing that was a good outcome for Paul. Congratulations. Yeah. I don't even know what your title is now. You're in Google. What is your?
We don't really have titles at Google. You just kind of call yourself whatever you want to. So
All right.
I call myself head of Adometry.
There we go. Perfect. And we have Steve representing the agency perspective, M&C Saatchi Mobile, obviously focusing on mobile. And I think it's a great panel. One of the things that we really want to encourage you all to do is to participate. So these panels work best when you ask questions. I'm going to do a couple of layups here at the beginning, and then we're going to sort of dive a little deeper. If you don't get out of this evening what you want to get out of it, is because you didn't ask questions. So please do. I'm going to get you warmed up by that by asking you some questions, simple hand-raising questions. Let's go with how many agency people in the room? Oh, a lot of agency people. Do we have any client people in the room? We have fewer client, but we have some clients represented. Next question. Back in the day, mobile was segregated from the rest of digital media buying. Do we have people who are working exclusively on mobile? We do. And the rest of you, I assume, are working on mobile and others. Hands up? Yes? Yeah, so mostly people are working on others. All right, let's kick it off. Let's start with the first question, which is a very easy one. Paul, I'm going to start with you. You've got the most experience. It's the easiest question. You should knock it out of the park.
Awesome.
Why is mobile important?
Why is mobile?
Can you
It's
remind
not. Sorry, no. Why is mobile important? So the reality is that's where everyone's at. We had the stat, 70% of activity is going to be on mobile devices. It's persistent. It's with you all the time. For a lot of segments of a lot of market segments, it's the only way that people access the internet. So it's important because it has scale.
Steve, did he forget anything?
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head. We view mobile as really the consumer at this point. And when you talk about marketing, there's a lot. We'll talk about cross-device attribution and things like that. But at the end of the day, a marketer wants to reach a consumer, not a device. And really the only way to do that effectively is to look at mobile as well. And I would say increasingly as we go after and work with a lot more international, global type of clients, you see in certain markets that, to your point, you have to be on mobile. It's the only way to really find them online. And so increasingly it's got to be at the forefront of your strategy and your marketing.
How are you guys actually defining mobile in this context? Is it mobile phone? Is it is it tablet mobile? Is it only tablet app is mobile, but tablet web is more desktop? I struggle with this all the time, right?
Yeah.
We talk about a mobile strategy. What do we mean by mobile?
So it's a very good question. I'd say from our perspective, we are very inclusive. We look at wearables. We look at Internet of Things. But really, mobile is defined generally by our clients, right? It's our clients telling us what they view as mobile, and sometimes that can differ from brand to brand.
I think the other thing that we've always thought that's really interesting and powerful about mobile is this idea that, to state the obvious, a mobile device, unlike some other devices, is typically, it's personal. It's one person that has it, so the ability to be able to segregate, this is a one-to-one relationship, is very powerful. And obviously, the other thing, again, to state the obvious, to sort of frame this thing is, mobile is, unlike some of these other mediums, it's a sensor that, as you're saying, you have with it all the time, it's always on. But you start to think about the fact that, not to get too philosophical, but for the first time in the history of humanity, you have now 70% of the population of this country walking around with a supercomputer that essentially is a sensor, that is almost like a robotic sensor that people are sharing information with. That is a fundamental paradigm shift that I don't think maybe wearables would be the next stage, but in my mind, mobile is the first wearable, essentially.
So what's it good at? What's mobile really good at? And then, Paul, I'm going to ask you what it's bad at.
So I think, if you build on that, right, mobile is really good for understanding a set of behaviors that other mediums are not. Because it's one-to-one, unlike desktop where multiple people will share a machine, mobile is unified to an individual. Mobile is contextually aware. So you have it with you, as Paul's saying, at all times. So it's extremely good for delivering people timely, relevant information when they're on the go, when they're traveling, when they're at a moment of impulse, a moment of purchase. You have it in the store with you when you're thinking about, do I buy product A or product B? It's an incredibly powerful platform for a whole series of jumping off points that I think become really, really powerful sort of foundations. So those are a few things that I think it's really good for.
I think that the things primarily that mobile's not good at relate to the form factor of the device, which is it's just not necessarily a great response vehicle. It's hard to convert on a mobile phone. If I'm seeing an auto insurance ad, I'm not going to be that willing to go through the process of filling out all the aspects to do an auto insurance quote. I'm going to go back to my PC that's a better form factor. So that's something that it's maybe not as good at. I will say, though, you're starting to see that change a little bit. I think in e-commerce, flash retail sites, for example, incredible amount of transactions happening on the mobile device because, again, it's with you all the time. So when something new comes on sale, you have it. You're alerted to that. You go on immediately to look at it. Click of the button, you buy something. So that's not entirely true, but it's not quite the same form factor that your PC is. And obviously, that's a big issue. If you're buying media on a device and the conversion's happening somewhere else, how do you track that activity more effectively?
Right, so that's our intro to the subject, right? So this is what we're going to talk about this evening. We're going to dive deeper from here. Steve, I'm going to go to you for the next question, and then, because we haven't heard from you, Lauren, you're going to have to answer too. When we're thinking about, and this is just beginning to scratch the surface, and we'll go deeper as we go through the evening. When we're thinking about mobile, what about the creative? What do you think about that? You're in the agency world. Does it make a difference? How should we deal with it?
Sure. No, I mean, it absolutely makes a difference. And this is often an education piece for us with any client, is explaining kind of the nuances of mobile. As most people, creative is an exciting, sexy thing. They want to use kind of engaging, rich units. But depending on the goal, if you have a DR kind of goal with mobile, we always, or not always, but I'd say majority of the time, we see kind of the simplistic messaging, not overly complicating things, not confusing the consumer with multiple kind of messaging and directions. And what we like to call, we call it universal, right? So yes, lifestyles can work, right, as you try to target specific audiences, but very often in terms of just achieving efficiencies, what we find is the simpler, the better. We'll always test, and I think that's the other really important side. You have limited real estate, and so there's only so many variables that you can really tweak, but it's important kind of setting up a testing framework that you can actually measurably account for those changes and what is effective. Is it the call to action? Is it the location of the logo? Is it the size of the font? Is it the font style, et cetera?
I would say, just to add to that, mobile has become everyone's best friend. Mobile is with you every hour other than the time you're in the shower and the time that you're sleeping. And in fact, most people wake up and the first thing they reach for is their mobile device. So as a marketer, what that means is you have the opportunity to connect with people in a way that you've never connected with them before. It's personalized marketing at scale. And so the world has all of the targeting capabilities possible for a mobile device. That's not the challenge. The challenge is breaking through all of the other things inside of a best friend that actually will stand out and matter. So what I believe is that mobile starts with an insight about the consumer, because you do have the opportunity to connect with them in such an interesting and meaningful way. Really understand who you're talking to first, and that's where your creative should start. Let your brand speak to individuals. Don't start with only your brand first. Start with the individual, start with the person, and then connect with them from there.
So to give you an example of that, so that's an interesting segue to, I'll give you a quick case study. So we do a lot of work in auto, and working with a big auto OEM. And so think top of the funnel. So we're working with an auto OEM. They're launching a new minivan. And there's a million reasons people buy a minivan. There's a million reasons people buy a car. And what we've been able to do, so we're looking at top of the funnel. We're looking at all the people that already own a minivan, or they're in market for a minivan, because we have vehicle registration data that's tied to mobile devices. And then we're looking at the behaviors of the people that are in the top of this funnel. What do they do? And there's like 16 or 18 really distinct behaviors we identified. And one of them was they go to the beach. This was last summer. And so now we built a creative for people who own a minivan or are in market for a minivan who've gone to the beach. And that creative was really specific to that mode. And it was calling out to the fact that this new minivan that's launching has a built-in vacuum cleaner to suck up the sand for when your kids have gone to the beach and they've trashed the back of the car umpteen times. So you can imagine somebody's been to the beach, they own a minivan, they're in market for a minivan, they got kids have spread sand in the car, now they're seeing a creative that's not leading with space or comfort or performance, but it's talking about specifically the attributes of that vehicle that pertain to that mode and moment. That to me is a very good example of using all of these signals from mobile to deliver a very relevant contextual ad that isn't overwhelming, that's very specific. So one quick use case.
Nick, I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to ask you guys if you have any questions for the panel. So difference between what Duncan's talking about, which is mobile strategy, and a cross-device strategy. What's the difference between these two things?
Well, I think it goes back to what the challenges are around mobile. You should definitely look at mobile as a piece of a larger strategy, but at the end of the day, you're trying to influence your potential customers. You're trying to understand your interaction points with everyone, and mobile is becoming an increasingly large part of that. But if transactionally it doesn't work well, if you're signing up for a 401k and it's really hard on a phone, having a mobile strategy only is going to look like mobile sucks. And in fact, a lot of our customers actually come to us and they say, because Tapad gets sort of siloed into the mobile bucket, they come to us and say, hey, great Tapad, I'm glad you guys are doing interesting things with mobile, but it just doesn't work. We've tried it with everyone else, and it doesn't work. And what we've really found is mobile may work really well, it's just really hard to understand the value that mobile's driving. While I'm sitting at my desk during the day on my phone or on my commute, I'm actually researching my 401k or the credit card or the car that I want to buy. I may be getting a lot of really interesting brand touch points as I'm doing that, but ultimately if I'm going to configure the car or sign up for the credit card or transfer money from my bank account to the 401k, that's not something that lends itself to a mobile device. And so if you look at it in the silo only, it will effectively look like mobile sucks. And so, mobile, very important, growing share of, voice, share of wallet, share of, mind share amongst consumers. But looking at it by itself would be like looking at, any type of media by itself. It's really just a piece of a larger puzzle.
What I would add to that is it just exacerbates the attribution problem that we have in the digital ecosystem. It adds this other dimension now, which is you have people on different devices. Yeah. So it's exactly what Nick said. It has to be foundational to how you look at your marketing activities. If you don't do that, you're missing the boat.
And cross-device doesn't give you everything either, right? Typically when we talk about cross-device today, we talk about it from a display or a video perspective. But you have cross-device behaviors across a variety of channels, search, social, display, video, et cetera. You have different functions within the agency and within the brand. So you've got your analysts versus your buyers versus your chief privacy officers. You have different points of the consumer funnel. So are they in the consideration cycle, or are they actually farther down funnel, or are they now a brand ambassador and they're actually talking to their friends about how great the brand is, right? Digital marketing is incredibly complex, and it's only getting more complex, and cross-device is making it harder, but cross-device by itself is not necessarily a solution either. You really need, and I think you're probably going to use this term at some point, you really need a larger identity management system that actually lets you understand the consumer across all of their touch points, be it device-specific, channel-specific, use case-specific, the different products that you're using. It really needs to be holistic.
Questions from the audience? Yes, over there.
It's
tracking.
Sounds like a layout.
Yeah. Who wants to handle that first?
I'll jump in. I think, to your point, it's incredibly fragmented. Right now, like, we're all in competition with each other as media platforms, and that doesn't make your job easier. And I think that we all recognize that, but all of our respective companies want to be the winner in this space. That said, there is an opportunity for you to understand each individual from an identity management system. Thank you for that. And you know, without being so much of a Facebook advocate here, looking at the industry at large, I think there are opportunities for you to think about viewability and think about the holistic journey that someone is on. And there are a number of different tracking systems in place that you can look at the duplication or the cross-platform measurement of how you're reaching people and make informed decisions. Who the right player is or publisher is to invest your money there, I could give you a couple of recommendations, but for the sake of today's panel, I think the best thing that you can do is make the most informed decision possible. And for anyone that tells you 20%, I mean, that's crap. That's absolute crap. Find the partner that's going to be able to help you inform your marketing decisions. And for what it's worth, like, the cookie is crumbling. 70% of our time is spent on mobile devices. We have to be able to fall back on identity. And I will put my Facebook stake in the ground. That's really where Facebook has helped marketers.
So I'm going to go to you, Nick, and then I'm going to go to Paul. So the question of tracking, there's a couple of choices, right? So you could spend everything with Facebook. They'll track it for you. That'll work, by the way, just in case you didn't know. You could probably do the same with Google if you wanted to, but then the two. Nick.
They could do it with us, too.
Tell us about what you think that they should do with tracking, and then, Paul, I'll get you to do a little rebuttal about what you think of Nick's words of wisdom.
Well, for starters, I don't know that I like the word tracking.
Okay.
It sounds like I'm stalking someone down Minna late at night. It has negative connotations.
That's what we hear.
Adding that local knowledge.
Right? I've actually had weird people follow me down this alley late at night. So what was the question again?
So the question, you know, his problem is that he's buying media on a variety of different places and platforms, and he's having a problem tracking the results. You know, I mean, what's he supposed to do?
So I think there's a couple pieces of tracking, right? There's the attribution perspective, which I think you both bring really well, right? Adometry can do this really well. Atlas via Facebook has a lot of cross-device tracking. The question is, what do you do with that data once you have it? Let's say that you have a report that says the ideal engagement process for someone is to first show them a linear TV ad, get them to understand the brand on television, which is increasingly a digital platform. You should then message them on a mobile phone, because while it's not transactional, you have more screen real estate as a percentage than you might on a desktop, et cetera. It really drives them down the funnel. But then ultimately, your last engagement should be on a laptop. You know, can you take the data from Atlas and actually do that anywhere other than Facebook? Can you take the data from Adometry and do that anywhere other than Google? I don't know the answers to those questions. I have some suspicions. And so, you know, I would look for a technology and a platform that can not only give you those insights, but also then let you take that data and leverage it wherever you want to. Maybe you want to go run a campaign with Good Housekeeping, which is not a Facebook or a Google property yet. You know, maybe you want to go do Sports Illustrated, or you guys do a lot of acquisitions. And so, you know, I would really look for someone that is not only a provider of the insights and of the data, but actually makes that actionable in all of the places that you want to target it. So this is not let's spend 100% of our budget on Facebook and Google because they have a really good data set. They would love you to do that. But, you know, everyone that sits in the brands and the agencies has value outside of those ecosystems. And so how do you take the cross-device data, the multi-channel attribution, and actually make use of it everywhere?
Wow, there's a lot to respond to there, Nick.
Cut me down, Paul.
Here we go. First thing I'll say, just to add a point of clarification, so Atlas doesn't have an attribution capability. They have some lift analyses that they do, and they have a great device grid. It's great, bring it on. We've been doing it for a long time. So there is a difference from that standpoint. I think an underlying aspect, and when you think of Adometry, is we are meant to be an agnostic measurement platform across an advertiser's entire media campaign, all media, whether it's bought on Google or Facebook or anyone else. And we provide cross-device insights as part of that so that we can help an advertiser understand what parts of their campaign are really working across, as users consume media and convert across the devices. So we can provide all that insight that Nick talked about. But there is a difference, which is there is the difference between targeting and analytics. We're talking about, from an Adometry standpoint, we're about analytics. I think Tapad's data can be used for both. For Google now, and look, before we were acquired by Google, we used Tapad. We were, frankly, the first attribution provider to work with Tapad to talk about the importance of bringing this data together, because I saw the importance of it, and Nick saw the importance of it. We made that happen.
And they dropped us like a bad habit.
We did. I hate to say it. Not like a bad habit. It did happen. It was a condition.
And much quicker than a bad habit, I suppose.
Bad habits are hard to break. We have this data at Google, so and the mechanism and how Google gets this data is different. And I'd say there's pluses and minuses approach, but we have this data. We think the data from an analytics standpoint that we have using, like Facebook does, the deterministic data of people logging in, so actual real login data, across the scale that we have at Google, just provides more accurate data for the purposes of analytics. That being said, Google's never going to allow that data to be used for targeting. So if you want to target media on this stuff, you're going to go to someone like Tapad, and that's great. But from an analytics standpoint, we're going to be able to give you data across all aspects of your media platform, leveraging a fractional data-driven attribution methodology that leverages a best-in-class, very accurate cross-device graph. So it should give you that comprehensive answer. And you're not going to get that from other people on the panel. It doesn't mean you can't find value in what you do at Facebook. Hell, we might show that Facebook is a fantastic place to go early in the conversion cycle for certain advertisers. We're going to provide that insight. Tapad might be able to provide great insight and great media execution at different points of the funnel. We're going to look at it as providing that insight on what's really working and not working.
But I guess my question to that is, and that's great, and we think that really speaks to the core of what our capabilities are. So the more people that are doing cross-device attribution analytics really well, I think that it's great for everyone.
Yeah.
The question
everyone here, frankly.
Yeah, completely. The question is, if the output says this is the strategy you should be using from a cross-device perspective to get the most out of your campaigns, if you don't offer a way to actually make that actionable, if yes, you may say that early in the early views work best for a user if they're on Facebook, and then down funnel it works better somewhere else. But where's the technology to actually execute on that? And you can't just say, I'm going to spend the first 2 weeks of my flight on Facebook and then try to do everything. You're flying blind in many ways. And so I think one of the challenges that Google will have is, yes, you provide these great insights. Can people actually do something on them to get the ROI that your awesome analytics actually provide? And that's part of the challenge.
If I may interject, not to be bold, but I actually think these guys are missing the big picture here, which is,
I love that.
If you zoom out from this, this narrow, blinded conversation, and you look at the media spend in this country, I would say that the thing these two guys are talking about, and the lady to my left, which is the idea of cross-screen of display and mobile, is still very much, and it's growing, but it's the minority of the media spend here, right? Media spend is out of home, it's print, and obviously it's predominantly TV. So you think about what we're here to talk about tonight, attribution revolution. I would argue this is not the attribution revolution. This is one tiny subset of it. So some of the things that, not to toot our own horn, we've been working on is attribution. So you go on our website, there's a case study where we've actually measured the effect of linear TV, regular TV, not addressable, regular TV, to drive visitation to retail stores. We're actually starting to do the same thing in out-of-home. You think about email. Email is still an incredibly effective mechanism, not being talked about in the attribution revolution here. Nick, you said it earlier, people spend their time across all these different mediums. And just arguing about 2 of the 20 that have the minority of the media spend, I think is a red herring. You've got to think about the whole holistic strategy here. It's not just digital. Consumers do far more than digital. They move through the world. They go to stores. They go to automotive dealerships. Understanding all of those behaviors and drawing them together, that's where the power is. And that's actually the thing that mobile can unify and provide this connective element across. And it's not about deterministic versus probabilistic. It's about that. And that, to me, is a really interesting thing.
So I'd like to jump in.
Oh.
So I'm going to put my agency hat on for a minute and just say, because I think your question was really around hey, I'm a marketer. I need to be accountable for the media spend that I run, and I have to give some sort of ROI. We've kind of danced around this issue a little bit. So I think what I would just say is you need to be inventive, right? As you've probably just heard, there's no universal solution. There's no silver bullet. And I think what we increasingly find is it is a conversation that you have to have with your partner in terms of their comfort level, in terms of what is available, because one of the things that we've overlooked also is there's a lot of data sensitivity. There are many brands that are uncomfortable sharing customer data with the Facebook and with the Google. And so we very often are faced with having to just think from square one. I mean, how do we measure anything, right? And I think you can kind of have a strategic conversation about lift analysis and using all these tools. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's one answer. It's really just kind of having a frank conversation about how are we going to track? What are we comfortable with? What is as close to perfect as we could get? Because we're never going to get perfect.
All right. Any other questions from the audience before I move? Yes, over here. We're going to give you a mic. And in fact, I'm going to ask you just to identify who you are, who you work for, as you ask the question. Because you've got a mic.
Thierry Cornette, Universal McCann. I think Duncan began to touch on my question, but I think that it can be expanded upon a little bit more. The topic of being revolutionary in the form of your attribution hasn't really been addressed here yet. And so wondering, from a present perspective, we obviously don't have a real solid attribution solution in place. No offense, Google or Facebook. So what are the future tenets of a attribution revolution? What are those milestones that we need to hit in the next 6, 12, 14 months to actually have a revolutionary moment?
So, great question. He's not with me, by the way, but absolutely. I think, if you're going to talk revolution, right, it's no disrespect. It's not about who's got the best deterministic cross-screen solution of massive vendors. It's what is the revolution from there. But you have to start with, the unified identity in digital. And then if you can extend that out to all these other media plays, to connected TVs, to addressable TV, to out of home, then you can now, we're not far away from being able to, the magical Nielsen dream of actually, not media mix modeling, but understanding media mix measurement across all these different platforms. That, to me, that's where the future is, and that's where the really interesting stuff is. I'll let these guys, build on that, but that's a revolution, right? Understanding all of these touch points, because the world is increasingly digital. You no longer need to guess or to survey groups or panels. That, to me, is the cusp of what we should be talking about.
Go ahead.
I was going to go to Paul because he runs an attribution.
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot of these pieces. So we do a lot more than digital attribution. That's what we started doing, 4 or 5 years ago. We really look at it from a concept of marketing performance management. How do we help an advertiser understand how all of their marketing is performing? So we do media mix modeling, top-down regression analysis to understand how you should allocate budget, very strategic online, offline marketing tactics analysis. And then you have bottoms-up digital attribution, which for your user-level media channels can give you very granular insight. And then we launched a capability that we essentially got from the Google team around TV attribution, where even though it's not user-level data, we're able to look at search query insights, minute-by-minute search query insights and site traffic data, and tie that to your TV campaign to provide really granular insight, similar to the kind of insight we can provide on digital attribution on how your offline media channels are working, both TV and radio. Now, all of those are different methodologies that cover comprehensiveness. I think where we're going is 2 fronts. One, how do we fuse those methodologies together so it's kind of a common interface that provides you soup to nuts reporting? And then how do we push those insights into the various transaction platforms you're using so we can make the insights not just actionable, but scalable? Now, that's a much broader discussion than talking about a mobile focus.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk to anyone as long as you want about how our broader solution works. So I do think that we attack that broader issue and we are creating that revolution, but I also know that we're here to talk about mobile.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is a structural problem, though, right? That you have, in most agencies or in most brands, you have different teams that are focusing on television versus search, versus social, versus display and video. And so if you really have true multi-channel, multi-device attribution, what does the agency actually do with that? Are you then saying, well, a lot of the credit we're giving to the search team right now, they shouldn't get that credit because they saw the display ad or they saw the video, and then they just hit Control-T, went to Google, and searched for that brand.
But a lot of times it's a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you use that example, if you do a better job on top of the funnel awareness building, that drives more search queries and drives increased spend in aggregate. So it's not, I've never seen it with clients be this zero-sum game where if someone wins, someone has to lose. I've not seen that yet. If anything,
I have seen that.
Okay, I've not. If I've seen it, it's been between online and offline. So online typically is winning because we're showing that online is working more effectively than they thought.
But just to be clear to your point and to bring it back to mobile, in case it wasn't crystal clear, what I'm suggesting is mobile provides that connective element because you have your mobile device when you go to the store. When you go to your PC and you order online, that's connected to your mobile device. When you go skiing, fishing, biking, hiking, you have your mobile device. So mobile is, to me, the revolutionary element that we've been lacking to unify offline and online measurement, attribution.
And the mechanism on how you collect that data, you want to make sure that's as accurate as possible, and that actually gets back to different approaches that you can take to get that data, deterministic versus probabilistic.
Let's get in the weeds because
we're trying to get you back.
We're going a little general here. Let's sort of bring it back down, and let's talk about the difference because this is something that everyone has to deal with. That if you want to reach people on mobile devices, you can do it on the mobile web or you can do it on an app, and there's sort of pretty big differences between the two. Let's talk about the differences between the two and how we should think about those two different ways of reaching people. Why don't I start with you, Lauren?
I think I'll just say, when you think about mobile, you first, and I said this before, you first have to think about the user. You have to think about the person that is using the mobile device. And we know that 80% of all time spent on a mobile device is in-app. So if you have to develop a strategy between a web strategy or a mobile app strategy, you make the call.
So from my perspective, we buy a mix of mobile media and desktop media for that matter. But we tend to value more the in-app inventory, not just because of the scale, but also because it is more accurate in terms of tracking, to get back to the tracking aspect of it, right? With the in-app data, if you have a tracking attribution partner, you capture the advertiser ID, whether that's the IDFA or the Android advertiser ID, and that is as close to the user or the consumer as I think you can probably get at this point. And so that allows us to do a lot of great things, not just in tracking, but in terms of remarketing, re-engaging. It's not, I would call it semi-persistent, right? It's not persistent, but in reality, how many consumers actually change their IDFA on their iPhones? It's a very rare thing. And so that gives us a lot more ability in the kind of the marketing that we can do, and therefore we sort of prioritize when applicable anyhow, the in-app inventory versus the mobile web.
All right. I'm going to go out to the audience again. Any other questions from the audience? No? I think we're good. Okay. So we've covered a lot of the things we were going to cover here. I'm sort of just going to go through them one by one. We were going to talk about cross-device and mobile, which we covered. We covered targeting people in-app and mobile web. We really, do we feel comfortable about the, we covered getting cross-device data. We used the words deterministic and probabilistic. Do we want to go over that at all? You feel good about that?
Does everyone here know what those two terms mean?
Hands up, everyone who understands the difference between probabilistic and deterministic. So a few.
Which is better, but I don't know which is better. Do you have any ideas?
I don't know.
Duncan throwing that softball, that beach ball pitch out there for us.
So I'm just going to give you a sort of a high-level view of that, and then Nick, I'm going to ask you to talk about it. You've got two people here on stage who can really know who you are, right? So Facebook and Google know who you are. They always know who you are.
I don't agree with that assertion, but continue.
Love to hear more. I'd love to hear more, actually. Can we pause before we go into probabilistic and deterministic? Because I would love to understand how Facebook doesn't know a lot.
I didn't say they don't know a lot. I said they don't know who you are. I mean,
how we don't know who you are.
There's plenty of blind spots that Facebook has
Sure,
today.
absolutely. There's blind spots everywhere. We might not know the last time you went to the bathroom, but we know what kind of toilet paper you use.
That's creepy. I'm a big Twitter user.
That's okay. They have like 10% of the user and the engagement that we have, but
Sure.
keep using Twitter. You could be a power user.
Right. I'll go a different direction. I use Mailbox as my email app on my phone. Someone sends me a link to my inbox. It happens quite a bit. I click on that link. It brings me into a web view within the Mailbox app. I have never in my life signed into my Facebook account in that web view on the Facebook app. You don't know anything about those interactions that are happening with me right there, nor will you in the foreseeable future with your login data. So,
so you are unreachable to many of the marketers that we work with every day.
Trust me, they wouldn't want to reach me anyways, but I am your negative targeting segment.
And that's okay. I just want to unpack a little around that. I'd love to hear your perspective around how for the 85% of everyone else that is on Facebook and does log in.
But they don't log in everywhere. They don't log in on their TV. They don't log in on their wearable devices. They don't log in on their Internet of Things.
Very
their Tesla's
true.
not logged in.
Well,
and so when we talk about identity management, it's nice to understand part of a user's identity.
Sure.
It's even better to understand the entirety of a user's identity. And I'm not claiming that Tapad has 100% coverage of all users.
Tesla screen, right? That's what I heard.
Yeah, that was going to be my case study
sorry,
later.
sorry. You have an analysis. Sorry, I didn't mean to break that news. But,
I'm going to go with a printer example. And so, again, I think Facebook and Google both have great data sets. I don't think they have infallible data sets. And so when we say things like Facebook and Google know everything about you,
Sure.
the reason I jump in there is I think we're overstating the actual capabilities of both of Facebook and Google in that sense.
I would say we're the closest.
I would say I like your data set better than I like Paul's data set.
So
Those are big wins for us at Facebook. Paul wins in a lot of other categories. Paul has have a
Basically,
couple.
every other category from that standpoint.
So, but okay, so take it back for a second. We're still talking about deterministic and probabilistic, and all I said.
I guess one thing I'd add to that, and just to be agnostic in this perspective, is and not to get too geeky, there's the aspect of false positives and false negatives. So in Nick's world, they've got a lot of false positives, which is they make, well, not a lot. They err on the side of including more in the device graph than not, whereas a deterministic model is going to have more false negatives where you might leave things out of the device graph.
So,
right?
So
instead of, I might have 5 devices, and Google and Facebook might know that 4 of those. Tapad might say that person has 6 devices or 7 devices based on the way they work.
Generically, I would agree with that. Nielsen did a third-party verification of our true positive versus how many false positives we have, and it was 92.1%.
Brilliant PR. Fantastic. It was great. It was really good. It was good.
Well, it's the truth. I mean, they're numbers, and the numbers don't lie.
It's Nielsen.
Yeah, all right, that's a fair point.
It's Nielsen.
But I think deterministic's a bad
Panel of 50,000 people.
I think deterministic's
5,000, right.
It's like an Abbott and Costello routine up here. I think deterministic is actually a bad word to use for it because logged in user data is not deterministic. You have people sharing accounts. You have multiple people on the same device. You have people with multiple accounts.
But that's rarer. Surely that's rarer.
but also,
I mean,
look,
5 years ago, you had one computer in the house, everyone used it. Now everyone's got their own computers.
But if you have some context
tablets are a
to
very
this,
shared device.
And you also say,
I
I'm going to defend you here, Nick, right?
That's because you're only looking at the login user data.
But the use case for this data is, if you're going to market versus measure and do analytics, they're very different, right? If you're going to market to people, whether it's 92, 97, or 99, or whatever you guys have,
still great.
It's almost irrelevant
awesome.
for marketing, right? You will market to that group of people. It's targeting, sorry, for targeting. If you're going to do measurement, now you're talking differently. So if you can separate out those two worlds, in the targeting use case, the fact arguing about 10% accuracy is almost completely irrelevant. If you're now doing measurement and you can separate out your deterministic versus your probabilistic, and you can measure on your deterministic, I'm assuming you might be able to do that. I don't know.
We can. But I still argue on this deterministic thing. So AOL.
So I just want to take it because we never actually defined the damn thing. So just for the record, all right, I will define it for everyone. So deterministic means, despite some pushback from Tapad over here, deterministic means you log in, and so I know who you are, right? So I've logged into Facebook, and I know who you are.
Across my devices.
Across my devices, right? And, all the caveats that Nick put around
and also
it.
to be clear,
but probabilistic.
But it's also, just to be clear, and it's using cookies and device IDs. It's not doing fingerprinting. I mean, none of us are doing fingerprinting.
Sure. But
it's leveraging.
Let's just define it for a second, right? So probabilistic means that I've seen these devices in similar locations. I might have seen my mobile device, for example, tends to spend a lot of time visiting a couple of other devices in a couple of other locations. And so probabilistic means that that's probably my tablet and that's probably my desktop.
Otherwise called guessing, right? No,
Right. And
Sorry,
Nick, you want to go?
That was a softball.
This is not what it sounds like when I pitch this.
Right. But that's the difference between the two. One is using statistics to figure out whether these devices belong to one person versus using a login to figure out whether these devices belong to one person. Sure. And they're two different ways of doing it. And Google and Facebook use deterministic login data that is verifiable and maybe not always accurate. And Tapad and some other companies use probabilistic, right? Yes?
This is true.
You want to go any further than that?
Well, going back to the accuracy piece a little bit. So AOL, a couple months ago, they actually beat us by a week, did a similar study with ComScore to show AOL's effectiveness at targeting people cross-device. It was all based on AOL logged-in users. So they had the HuffPost logged-in users and AIM users and whatever people do to log in AOL these days.
It's AOL.
But their accuracy percentage with deterministic data was 93%. And so again, to treat it as if it's this theoretical 100% accuracy is just, it's naive.
I guess I'm going to use the Ricky Bobby thing, with all due respect.
And then you're just going
to... And then I'm going to slam AOL because they're not here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to slam it. It's just, come on, there's no comparison between AOL's device graph and Google or Facebook.
But they're using, I'm not on a scale perspective,
yeah, but
obviously.
But
the scale is, you're going to be off, again, there's the false negatives and false positives. They're going to miss devices because they just don't have as comprehensive of a device graph.
But that's not what the 93% number is.
Yeah, but if it's logged in, it doesn't matter, right? If you've got 1,000 logged in users versus 100 million,
they're not logged in on as many devices. The chance that someone's logged in pervasively.
Yeah, but the deterministic match should still be very high quality.
Use AOL enough to want to log in on my mobile device for them.
I would just ask the audience, who would use deterministic versus probabilistic? Who would favor deterministic?
That's about half the room.
51%.
And probabilistic? Probabilistic? That's no one. That's not. So I'm just going to.
We finished it.
I'm just going to fight for these guys for a second because the really huge problem you have with deterministic is that you can only use it with one vendor.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yes.
It's a massive problem.
Today.
For targeting.
That's not the only problem. This was the Q3 2014 Facebook SEC filing for their earnings. They said that it's nearly 48% of their users are now mobile-only users. So people are not using Facebook on the desktop anymore. Sure. Right? So there's a huge blind spot there at that point.
That goes back to then they have a bunch of false negatives.
But I would say most of those users
it becomes a scale. It becomes a scale problem.
That's what I said. There's
mobile
issues on both
is
sides.
the first screen. Mobile is the only screen. There's no desktop even in their life.
Yeah, but that comes back to my point where if you can only identify people on mobile, mobile is an amazing medium, but it is not the only place where advertising dollars are spent or people spend their time. So you've only got that one understanding of a consumer there.
I'll give people a hint. The real solution is to use a combination of both deterministic and probabilistic. Neither of them is going to be a silver bullet.
That's where we all make up.
Should we hold hands now? Or?
Kumbaya.
All right. I got one question over here.
Yeah, this is unrelated.
I love unrelated questions.
Okay, so I work on a couple CPG brands, and this is something that I don't think we've really touched on. The connection between mobile and a mobile presence, and then in-store purchases. Like, what if e-com is not really a part of your strategy? And what are kind of I just want to know, what are the preferred attribution models to tie together mobile, which we know, like, our target is on mobile. We're trying to sell that through because we believe in it, but our clients are saying, but how can we tell if a mobile ad is driving in-store purchases?
Yeah,
especially with geo-targeting. You know, we're saying...
Steve and Duncan, I'd like to
I'm going to have to take that. So
okay.
Yeah. Well, the reason...
Like I could shut him up if I wanted to.
Yeah, no, so... The reason I'm going to have to answer that is because we had that exact question almost 3 years ago from a a very, very large retailer who said, we haven't spent any money of significance in mobile advertising. And we said, why? And they said, because we still sell 98% of our product in store. And the mobile industry is telling us the KPI we should care about is people clicking on banners in a mobile application. But we don't understand how to value that to driving in-store traffic. So PlaceIQ, if you can solve that problem for us, we'll spend money with you. And we went back, and there was no, so there's two ways you can solve that problem, right? One is you can do your fully deterministic or probabilistic match to offline data, and you can figure that out, and we do that, and lots of other companies do that, but that has many holes in it. Or you can do what we did, whereby we said, hey, this mobile device now provides this sensor network. You can understand where consumers go. So I wonder, we literally went back to the office, and we drew a bunch of polygons around some of these large retail stores from this client. We said, I wonder how many devices we see inside a store that we can actually see through ad requests with location on, and it turned out to be a lot. And I think we can build an attribution model from exposure to advertising to in-store visitation. And we launched that 2.5 years ago, and we called it Place Visit Rate, and it's almost become an industry standard now. And it is basically the ability to measure advertising exposure, and we've backed it into TV and email and all sorts of other mediums now, using the mobile device as a sensor to measure how many of those people end up going to the resale store, the automotive dealership, the QSR, casual dining, hotel, et cetera. And that, again, to attribution of mobile is, I think, one of the unique properties of mobile, because you have it with you, it's location aware, you've opted in to share data to actually understand foot traffic to a location. It's been very, very powerful. Steve? Oh, yeah.
My follow-up question to that would be, is it matching up to sales data? Do you know?
Yep. So we now have, I won't mention the companies, we have some of the largest retailers in the US, we have their traceable purchase data. So we're now able to go to the next level. So I think it's public. We work with, for example, Duncan, all the Kroger brand supermarket data. So we can now do measurement to individuals based upon what did they actually buy. We have an attribution product with DataLogix and Polk. Did you go to the car dealership? Did you buy a car? So it doesn't cover everything, obviously, but we work with DataLogix and in other categories. So we're now starting to fill in, not only did you go to the store, the dealership, et cetera, but did you actually convert, and what was your basket size? So yes.
Steve, you got anything you want to add?
I mean, I would just say, I think Duncan painted a very good picture, right? And these are all the things I think that are developing. But from a marketer standpoint, I would just say what I have always experienced is a scale issue. So to a certain point, there are these tactics that you can use. But at the end of the day, if an advertiser really wants to spend aggressively, you start to hit some limits. And so I think it's, as we've said, I mean, really as a marketer, you should be using every tool in your tool belt. And that includes using some of this location data because it is there. But again, at least in my experience, it's been somewhat limited. But there's other tactics, right? There's some old marketing tricks that we have, such as couponing, right? And I think, you know, at the end of the day, what a brand needs is they need some data points to act upon. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be getting that data point every time that you run an ad, but I think you need some directional information in order for your contact to be able to sell it up. And you know, I think that's what we do. We try to see what is available and what kind of combination of these tools can we use to paint at least a directionally friendly picture in terms of what's happening.
All right. You have to get on a plane, so I'm going to go to the last question here. He actually does. He's got a flight at 9:15, right?
It's not just because I'm getting killed up here.
So just to end up the panel, and then we can take more questions at the bar. Why don't each of you run through, and Nick, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go out to the sides.
All right.
Just to be different. A case study, something you've done in mobile that is educational to the people in the audience.
This is not truly a case study, and frankly, it's not even truly a mobile example, but I'm going to give it anyways.
Okay.
The power of cross-device. We had a printer manufacturer approach us, and you know, the way we talk about cross-device is really any internet-connected device can be part of our technology platform. And they said, well, here's an idea. We want to get our printers inside your device graph, and the device graph is the thing that we have that connects all these things together. And then when the printer's actually low on ink, we want to find all of the other devices in that household and show them an ad that says it's time to buy the black ink cartridge for 10 times the price of gold or whatever. They probably went to Google and Facebook first because they're awesome companies, but no one logs into their printer. So they were shit out of luck there. And we said,
Touche.
So false negative.
And so we said, if you can change the firmware in your printer and actually have your printer ping our service on a regular basis, we can get your printer in the device graph. You then tell us when the printer's low on ink. We message people and say it's time to go buy ink.
And they got a $23 campaign out of it.
No, it was, well, only because no one updates their firmware, but that's neither here nor there. But I think what it really illustrates is, the power of identity management or cross-device or any of these things today is really thought of, right? We talk about phones, we talk about tablets, and we talk about computers, but we're going to be talking a lot more about TVs, we're going to be talking a lot more about cars, appliances, wearables, et cetera.
Toasters and fridges.
Exactly. So everything's a digital device at this point, and we really think from an identity management and a cross-device marketing tactic, we're just scratching the surface at this point, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger.
Facebook.
Awesome. So I think that really...
Word association?
Google.
Awesomer.
Ding, ding, ding. So I think what's really interesting is the amount of time that is spent on mobile devices. If you paid attention to our Q4 earnings, about 85% of our users are on mobile devices every single day. They are checking their mobile phones and their Facebook newsfeed 10 to 15 times a day. That provides a very powerful screen for marketers. Where Facebook really cemented ourselves and drove value in a place that had never actually been established before was in the mobile app industry. And essentially, in the past, the only way a mobile app developer was able to drive discovery for their app was to be in the top of the top ratings within a category, or the top 10 of the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, for that matter. And what Facebook actually did is, because of our powerful targeting and the thumb-worthy DR solutions that we offer, we actually developed a marketplace for mobile app developers to distribute their applications. Further, we also found that after people have apps installed in their mobile devices, the next step is driving people back to re-engage with that app. So if you're a travel app, you want people not only to download that app, but then to actually go back and book a hotel or to book a vacation. So because Facebook knows which people are going to drive higher value, have a higher lifetime value to that marketer, we're able to actually deliver a very targeted message and drive people back into that app to make a transaction, and then measure that all the way through. Now that's very mobile specific to Facebook, but that's just one example of how Facebook was able to essentially develop a marketplace for an underserved category.
Paul?
I'm going to give a little bit of a different example. It ties into the power of mobile as it relates to our TV attribution capability, which is relatively new. So this is work we did with LifeLock. And so the way our TV attribution works, again, is we look at search query data, and we look at site visit data, and we are able to match that up through our relationship with Rentrack to the specific TV ads, and then we do the same thing on the radio side with the data the client gives us on their radio activity. And a couple of things came out that were really interesting for LifeLock, which was they do a lot of promotion on radio talk shows, syndicated radio talk shows. They buy a ton of media on Rush Limbaugh and a ton of media on Hannity. And they found that even though Hannity has half the audience, that it actually performed twice as well. But more interesting than that, and the mobile tie into that, is they found that so much of that activity, that search query activity, was happening on mobile and tablet devices, that they realized that their mobile site, which is where people were going, just wasn't up to snuff. And so they invested then, two things they did. They invested in better improving their mobile site so that it could provide a better image, because they knew so much of their traffic from their TV spend was hitting their mobile site. And they also recognized they needed to spend more money in mobile-based advertising to kind of reinforce that message based on what they saw. So it's a pretty cool example of how data on TV is driving a lot of activity on mobile devices.
Steve?
So I'll give an example of a global client that we have who came to us with a project, which was essentially, hey, I have both a desktop and a mobile service, and it's available in about 70 different countries. I need to understand how I should spend my digital marketing dollars, right, from an acquisition standpoint. How do I get more users? So they had an issue where they had overall declining user base in these markets, and they said, what's the right media mix, at least digitally? And we started to do the research, and we were overlaying kind of what's the market penetration, what's the mobile penetration within this country, what's the desktop penetration in this country. And we started to really think that despite some preconceived notions that desktop users were more valuable to them, that there'd be an easier propensity for us to acquire mobile users efficiently. And as we kind of rolled out the campaign and selected the markets that we thought made the most sense in terms of what is the cost of media in these markets and all those other factors that I just mentioned, we actually saw that we could shift some of that decrease in the market by offsetting the decline that they were seeing on desktop by increasing their mobile penetration in those markets. And lo and behold, as we've been able to run that campaign for a few months, we've actually seen much better retention rates in terms of users on a mobile device, which I think speaks to something that we've heard all night, right? That people are increasingly on their phone. And so I would just say, from a mobile perspective, your client is never, the end game is never the install. The end game is either a sale or usage. And I think you have to have a strategy in mind to really take that into consideration. And increasingly, usage is on a mobile device, however you define that.
Duncan, take us home.
Yeah, so one of my personal favorites, another automotive example. So we did a lot of work with a bunch of different brands. One of them is a luxury European import brand. And we're running a campaign for them, initially on mobile, that was targeting consumers who'd recently been to competing luxury auto dealerships. So we've seen people on these competing luxury auto dealerships, a bunch of other line items. So we're showing them contextually relevant ads. And then in the analytics, we're now looking at all of the derived analytics of those consumers we've targeted. What types of things do they do? Where do they go in the world? How do they behave? The things they buy, et cetera. And one of those line items was, what other dealerships did they visit in the same period that we targeted them? And did they get to our dealership? And then what other dealerships? And so you can see all the usual suspects, right? The other luxury auto brands. And one brand massively stood out. Without naming all the names, it was a Korean brand that has a new brand of luxury vehicle within that brand. And they have been conquesting very heavily our brand. And we're like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And hey, import brand, you never identified these as a competitor. No, we've been thinking, but now we can say, listen, this isn't a survey or a panel or a focus group. We can see that people are going to your dealership and they're visiting this Korean import dealership with a very, very high propensity. So, and it's not modeled, it's all real data. So you are now in the consideration set with these guys. And then I was with a meeting with a client, and the client said, well, hang on a second. So those people who are going from our lots to their lots, are they our entry-level people? Because we would expect some cross-shopping between our entry-level people and their brand. Or are they our very, very important luxury people? So we dug behind the data, and we could now see that this is your actually most valuable customers, your luxury auto customers who are going to this Korean import brand. So you have a real problem here. So the client said, well, great, we're going to take that learning. And now, in a new campaign that we're running cross-screen, and we're running now, we're starting to empower them to send emails as well. We're now targeting the Korean import guys, but just the luxury people. So it was a complete new learning for this OEM. This is a new brand you are really competing with, massive early warning in real time. They took that learning, turned it around with a custom creative, and targeted those people cross-screen in a probabilistic way, sorry. So it's a highly successful campaign.
And that's why it works so well.
Yeah, there you go. So thank you very much for the time. Some of the things we obviously learned this evening, you can target people across devices either deterministically or probabilistically, either within a group or across multiple properties. But what's most interesting, I think, is some of the out-of-the-box things you can do with mobile, some of these new analytics ideas, changing the way you think about attribution. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Bar is still open. I'll see you there.